Hello everyone, Mark Corcoran here again. Arthur Butler and I wrote metal uniform embellishments of the Australian Army in the post 1953 or QE2 series in both electronic and hard copy forms. Today we're going to have a look at the content of the book and expand it slightly to discuss what happens to badges in the course of their use in service, what happens when they become damaged, how are they repaired, how are they altered by units during the course of the lifetime of the badge, what soldiers do to them to enhance them, to make them more uniform friendly, and so on and so forth. So this is a brief walkthrough of a series of items in our reference collection which show you typical examples of service alteration in the course of a lifetime of a badge. We'll start off with basic damage, repair, and then go all the way through to fundamentally remodeling a badge in the course of its service and its use. Okay, so the first badge shows a modern Western Australian infantry badge. You can see at the bottom that these pins typically break off at their pin mounts, and the bottom one is broken off and this one has simply been resoldered. Nothing particularly spectacular about that, but it's relatively common to see that sort of pin loss damage in current issue Insignia. Next up is the first pattern tri-service ADF hat badge. This particular variant has a lot of piercings in the design and it is inherently reasonably fragile. It's quite simply cast. These parts of the sword blade break off and the Federation star at the top has a tendency to break off as well. They're reasonably small. They're certainly smaller than the second strike of this badge, which doesn't feature in this particular walkthrough, but this example here shows some glue being used to hold where the badge commonly snaps. The Federation star commonly snaps at the top here. There's very little attachment. You can see a hairline crack here, so there's been some glue used to stabilize the badge. And if we go to the next photo, we're looking at the front of the badge, this time the front of the same design. Again, you can see all these piercings in here. It's quite a light design and the anchor is actually free of the boomerang and swords altogether in this particular first strike. This particular badge has been repaired with solder and it's now in need, I guess, of some gilt work in order to be able to camouflage that solder repair, but the badge is now back in one piece and probably stronger than when it was originally made. So that's what happens to badly made issued equipment. It breaks and sometimes it's repaired rather than replaced. Moving on, we're looking at a fairly standard post 1953 artillery hat badge, as you can see. This one is the OR's version. OR's and up to Warrant Officers Class 2. It does not have the additional wheel that is featured on those officers' badges, but what you can see from this particular image is that the crown device at the top of the badge, you can probably just detect, is in fact sitting quite far away from the background of the gridded paper that we've got here. So this badge is actually bent back towards the observer, and we're going to have a careful look at why that's been done by the soldier who used this badge. In this particular image you can see that this hat badge is flat all the way along the base, and you can see this curvature swinging back towards the apex pin at the top of the badge. And we'll go through a couple of photos and we'll ultimately see exactly why this has been done. Here we have Another look at the curvature of the badge, again quite straight all the way along the bottom between these two lower pin mounts, and you can see the curvature swinging upwards, if you like, or to the right in this photo towards the apex pin behind the crown device, and the next photo will show you very clearly what's actually been done here. Those of you with a service background will recognize immediately what's going on here. Here's the straight base below the gun trail. Here's the straight forward wheel without the separate moving part that you'll see on a later badge. Here's the apex pin bent quite back, and the entire upper half of the badge follows a nice arc. So those of you with a service background will recognize that this has been used by another ranks soldier for use on the slouch hat. So you will know that the brim is turned up on the left hand side. At the base of the upturned brim, it's quite straight and quite flat, and the curvature of the upturned brim as it's fastened to the top of the headdress above the puggaree forms a nice curve. And obviously a completely flat badge would be inches away from the top of the slouch hat. This is a particularly tall badge, so it needs to be molded, or in this case curved, towards the curvature of the upturned brim, and it's perfectly designed for that purpose. So this would have been issued in a flat condition, and it would have been rolled by the soldier, deformed slightly to actually be used on the parade grade khaki fur felt or slouch hat, if you like. Now, not to be outdone by ORs, officers with this fairly large artillery hat badge, and other corps do it too, but artillery are quite commonly engaged in bending their badges because of the particular length of the badge base. This is the bottom of the officer's pattern artillery hat badge, and you can see it's the officer's pattern because there's you're looking at the wheel band of the wagon, of the gun wagon wheel that sits on front of it that turns to keep officers entertained, apparently. You can see that it's been bent in this opposite direction to the OR's one. The OR's one was bent on the vertical axis. This has been bent on the horizontal axis, and again, those of you with a military background or service background will understand that this is to make that the badge face fit on the curved face of a service dress cap that was worn during this period. It's now effectively been discontinued in general use, except perhaps for bands and so on and so forth, and at ADFA. Generally speaking, this particular torturing of a badge is not necessary in current service times, but from the 1953 right through to the mid 1980s and 1990s, until that cap was removed from service, this was quite common. And you'll see badges bent this way. They are not damaged, they've been deliberately altered so that they can be used properly in service wear. Here's the same badge again. You're looking at the bent base of the badge design. So this is where the wearer's forehead would be behind the badge when the badge is worn on the front visor, and you can see your lower pins and your apex pin here, and you can see the rivet in the center which is holding the movable wheel on the outside of the badge design. This is a look from the top. There's the crown device, there's your apex pin, and you're looking down on top of this wheel that turns on the insignia. One final look, the same sort of angle, this time from behind. Again, you can see the rivet at the back of the badge holding the front turning wheel. You can see the curvature where the brim, where this would be fastened to the hat, and this of course is the upper part of the design. This is the crown device at the top. Now we're having a brief look at the back of a dental corps hat badge. I probably should have provided you with a photograph of the pins from the side, but what's happened here is somebody with appropriate dental equipment has split the pins so that they are, and hammered them out so that they are flat and sharp, and the pin is effectively half the size that it was, or half the thickness more correctly, and with a pointed end, and this makes the pin pierce the service dress cap material much more easily. So this is, I guess, a crime of opportunity. The service personnel in the dental corps have access to various types of tools and dental mold making equipment, and so you often find quite elaborate badge design alterations to make it easier to use in service. Similar torture to the badge structure has happened here, but it's much less sophisticated. The typical surgery has been done. The lugs have been unceremoniously snipped off with a pair of side cutters, I would presume. A piece of a strip of tin has been soldered to the back of the badge. It's difficult to see here, but there's two prongs, two upturned 90-degree turns to this material that's been soldered flat, and this has created foldable tongs which can be used to fasten the badge to the hat. It's fairly comprehensive and fairly unattractive surgery, but it's not entirely unusual because these lug fittings are in fact fairly unfriendly in terms of service wear, and you'll often find collars, which we'll look at later, which have been modified in service to deal with the fact that they don't otherwise sit on collars very easily. And here's a classic example. This is a collar-sized 53 to 65 period badge for the Australian University Regiment, and you can see it's had its lug fittings unceremoniously cut off, and a simple pin with a right angle bend has been araldite to the back of the badge. These things seem to be in circulation fairly commonly, so probably the officers from that unit have a long history of altering their badges in this way. You'll probably find these fairly easily. Here's something more interesting, some Ramey epaulet flashes and an ordnance one as well. You can just see here from the front that there's some structure underneath which marks them out as being different, and when we look at the next image we can see turned over that technicians with access to a workshop have removed the pins and replaced the pins with, in this case, a brass strip that's been glued to the back of the epaulet flash, soldered in the middle where it's been joined. These are two aluminium strips that do much the same job. This is designed to make epaulet flashes fit the uniform epaulet without punching holes through the epaulet material with pins. So this appeals to some soldiers with particular uniform dress needs, especially epaulets that aren't of the standard size in terms of greatcoats and what have you. Here's an interesting example of alteration during the course of service. This is a South Australian Mounted Rifles hat badge in the post 53 to 65 period. Typically a white metal badge in most collections. This one has had what's called saw piercing done to it quite comprehensively in quite scrupulous detail, and this unit is reasonably famous for doing these things. I'm not sure that they were done within the unit. They're done particularly well, probably done by a jeweler I would imagine, but you'll sometimes see them still with coloured backing cloth, and obviously these piercings, some people choose to call them voids. They're not voids. A voided hat badge is a hat badge that's been, or a badge that's been decommissioned, and it's typically had the collar, the chrome beg your pardon, the crown device at the top removed as part of the decommissioning process, and those badges are said to have been voided. And some people call these piercings in the design voids. They're not really voids, and it's not really a voided badge. It is a badge with piercings to the design, or in this case the piercings have been added to an otherwise unpierced design, so that the backing cloth for different companies of different colours can be seen through the otherwise consistent unit hat badge. Let's have a look at these piercings. Here's the badge lying on its face. You can see the front, the bottom and top pin from the back of the design, and you can see how comprehensively the shrike has been cut out. It's quite fine. It's not been done with a bandsaw. It's been done with quite precise jewellery grade equipment, I should imagine, given the detail around these feathers. There's no rounding at all. This has actually been individually picked out, and this gap in here between the shrike's legs and tail is pretty much indicative of something much more than unit level alteration of the badge, I would suggest. Here's a close-up shot where you can see the detail. This is not just simply been sawn away. This has actually been faced, and the details have been of the shrike's feathers have in fact been preserved. It's quite sophisticated. Here's another shot. This is again on an angle on the back. You can see the attempt to preserve the design detail in the feathers. On to something simpler. This is a general service hat badge. You'd all be familiar with it. It's got a fairly ugly painted surface which is badly worn over the years. It's obviously quite flat matte paint applied to a standard aluminium badge substrate, and here is a similar treatment of a collar badge. Now, exactly who painted these items with this matte paint and for what purpose is not necessarily particularly clear. It may well have been one of the Northern Reconnaissance units. It may well have been for other purposes. They're not worth perhaps canvassing here. It's just that you will find these hand painted items in circulation from time to time, and they are potentially prepared by units for various purposes, and this, once the paint gets somewhere to it, tends to give you this shaggy dog look here. Looking now at some further service alteration, here you can see the first pattern Norforce hat badge, which most people would be familiar with. You can see that the design does not feature enamel. However, the same pattern hat badge does appear in circulation with this apparently hand painted synthetic enamel, or paint if you like, in the double diamonds at the base or between the boomerangs and the design, showing every sign of actually being baked rather than simply painted and left to air dry. There is a suggestion that this was done at unit level. We have no authoritative research on exactly who's done it. However, it may well have been a unit level modification to the standard badge design. The next image is of the standard Norforce collar on the left, and an accurate reproduction of it, apparently done by a jeweller, with a sterling silver maker's mark, a sterling silver mark, I beg your pardon, which we'll look at in a moment. There's the front of the collar as you would expect, compared to the back of the sterling silver copy with its brooch fitting. And this is a close-up of the 925 sterling silver mark and the way the item has a brooch fitting. There is a suggestion that this was produced as the unit by the unit, or through the unit more accurately. Whether it's a souvenir item or whether it's for another purpose, the jury is out on that, and research is currently being done as to its actual purpose. However, when you look at the front of them, that you can see this copy in sterling silver is a faithful reproduction in all of its detail. It's beautifully made, and it may be that it's merely a souvenir for wear on a suit. It may also have had another purpose, and perhaps at some stage when we release volume 2 we may have settled the actual purpose of it by that stage. Scooting through the other examples we've got of in-service alteration is this standard Sydney University Regiment collar used by the band in a chromed format. This collar has been fairly unsophisticatedly fitted with a large tongue at right angles to the badge design for use as a sporran badge, and we'll have a look at that fitting in a moment. There it is. You can see the standard collar, simple butt solder joint here with a hole through this tang to pin it in place on the sporran. Speaking of Sydney University Regiment, this is a chrome version of a Killarney badge used by the band. They come in both chrome and in silver finish. This is the Argyll and Sutherland band badge behind the Sydney University Regiment Band in chrome, with the red backing peculiar or typical, beg your pardon, of the Sydney University Regiment Band sitting between the two items. So this is called a Killarney. It's been documented in use by the Sydney University Regiment Band by a number of people over the years. Here's some close-up detail for you to have a bit of a look at. That's the top, obviously that's the bottom, and now we'll have a look at the back. You can see that the standard Argyll and Sutherland badge is used in toto here, and the Sydney University Regiment Band badge is held on with the standard pin fittings, and the clutch grips are in place. In some other examples you will find that this part here has been removed to turn this particular part of the Argyll and Sutherland design into a sporran badge, and we'll have a look at one of those in a moment. So there's a close-up of the Killarney, and here's the Argyll and Sutherland sporran badge that we were just talking about, apparently cut from the standard Argyll and Sutherland hat badge. There's the verso of the item with the pins intact, or the lugs intact, beg your pardon. Here is an example of a Sydney University Regiment collar in silver finish, and you can see in terms of service alteration that it has come from another army's collar design, and it has been freed of the scroll work, and then this is clearly plated in gold, and it's clearly been adopted by the band in the unit's preferred silver finish. This is an example of the collar badge involved, seen from the obverse, beg your pardon, from the verso side. Again, you can see the original gold leaf badge with its scroll work, and the scroll work's been cut away from the batten down the bottom to be worn as a much simpler collar. Moving on, we're now looking at a badge which has been completely remanufactured by the New South Wales cavalry unit, which uses this hat badge design. You can see here in raised lettering 1885 to 1985, so it's a centenary parade for the unit. These were known to have been used by the unit for that particular parade, and this particular item came from a serving soldier in that unit at that time. You can see the lugs top and bottom, and you can see that the badge itself has been engraved with the number 244, and the interesting thing about that is that you can see that this is not a white metal badge which has been engraved to show further white metal underneath. This is clearly a remade brass badge which has been silver plated with raised lettering with the dates and individual engraved numbers applied after the silver plating has been done to expose the brass substrate rather than the white metal component that the badge is typically made of. So that's a fairly comprehensive surface alteration. That's a completely separate run of badges done out of a different metal substrate with a different finish with this different parade specific detail incorporated into it. So there we are at the end. We hope you have had a fairly good walk through, a reasonable cross section of badges which have been damaged and repaired or altered for service use to make them easier to fasten to uniforms, and badges which have been fundamentally remodeled for use by specific parts of a unit for specific purposes, and ultimately badges made specifically by a unit for a specific purpose, in that case, in the last case, a centenary parade. We hope you enjoy this, and we hope that you find it useful. Thank you.